All right, let's dive right into a geopolitical standoff that's pushing an entire nation to the edge. We're talking about a story of oil, revolution, and a feud that's been simmering for over 65 years. And it's all happening just 90 miles from the U.S. coast.
And it all kicks off with this, an absolutely bone-chilling ultimatum from the President of the United States. There's no wiggle room there, is there? This isn't just some policy memo, it's a countdown timer strapped to a country. So to really get why this was sent, we need to look at the one event that lit the fuse.
You see, the trigger for this whole crisis wasn't even in Havana. It was in Caracas, with the absolutely shocking collapse of Cuba's #1 ally. Imagine this, January 3rd, 2026. The night in Caracas is just shattered. U.S. Delta Force launches a lightning-fast raid on the presidential palace, and it ends with the capture of Nicolas Maduro. Just like that, in one single night, the Venezuelan regime, a huge anti-U.S. player in the region, was basically decapitated. But the blood that was spilled that night, it wasn't only Venezuelan. And this is where it gets crazy. The raid revealed a staggering cost for Cuba. Out of the 75 security guards killed trying to protect Maduro, 32 of them were Cuban. And we're not talking about just any guards. These were elite intelligence and special forces. They were the invisible wall propping up the Venezuelan government. And their deaths suddenly exposed to the world just how deep this alliance really ran.
So that begs the question, right? How did this incredibly strange partnership and alliance of oil and brains even start? Well, to get Cuba's crisis today, we gotta rewind the clock to see how this whole thing was forged in the first place. Okay, back in 1991, the Soviet Union collapses and Cuba is basically left orphaned. Its economy completely implodes, leading to this awful period of near starvation they called the Special Period. Then, fast forward to 1999, and a new lifeline just appears out of nowhere. At a baseball game in Havana, an aging Fidel Castro meets this charismatic new leader from Venezuela, Hugo Chavez. It was a total meeting of the minds, and the start of an alliance built on shared ideology and, honestly, mutual desperation.
So the deal they cooked up was one of the most unusual barter systems in modern history. Venezuela, sitting on the world's largest oil reserves, started sending almost 100,000 barrels of cheap oil to Cuba every single day. That oil was the lifeblood that literally restarted Cuba's heart. And in return, Cuba sent its most valuable asset, its people. Thousands of doctors and teachers poured into Venezuela's poorest areas. But, and this is the crucial part, Cuba also sent its top-tier military advisors and its feared G2 intelligence agents. They basically rebuilt Venezuela's security forces to protect Chavez from his enemies, both at home and abroad.
So with Cuba's lifeline now totally severed, the spotlight shifts to Washington. And you have to understand, the decision to crank up the pressure there, it isn't just strategy. For the guys calling the shots, this is deeply, deeply personal. So let me introduce you to the main architect of this maximum pressure campaign, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. For this guy, this is not just another file on his desk. He's the son of Cuban exiles who fled right before Castro's revolution. He grew up on stories of a paradise lost. So for him, toppling the regime in Havana, it's the mission of his life. It's a fight to restore what he sees as his family's lost honor. And why is President Trump so on board with Rubio's personal mission? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Florida. It used to be a swing state, but now it's a Republican fortress. And that fortress was built on the votes of Cuban and Venezuelan Americans who have this deep, visceral hatred of communism. So by getting tough on Cuba, Trump fires up that base. For him, the fall of Havana would mean locking down Florida for the Republican Party for generations to come.
And, this whole approach is a complete 180-degree turn from what we saw before. The Obama administration, they tried engagement, right? The idea was kind of like, let's make friends with the tiger and maybe we can tame it. Rubio's doctrine is the polar opposite. He's saying you can't befriend a tiger. You have to cage it. The goal isn't to influence the regime anymore. The goal is to starve it until it collapses.
But look, this isn't just about Florida politics or some old grudge. The fight over Cuba is really a flashpoint in a much bigger global power struggle. It's like a new Cold War is being fought right in America's backyard.
This whole strategy, it's rooted in what people are calling the Dawn Doctrine. Think of it as a supercharged 21st century version of the old 1823 Monroe Doctrine. The original warned Europe to stay out of the Americas, while Trump has revived it to basically declare the Western Hemisphere as America's turf, period. No foreign rivals allowed. And from Washington's point of view, those rivals are already here. We're talking Pentagon intelligence reports that show China has been setting up electronic spy bases in Cuba,
perfectly placed to listen in unsensitive U.S. military chatter. And at the same time, Russia has been docking its nuclear-powered subs and warships in Havana's harbor. I mean, that's a direct show of force right off the coast. So the U.S. strategy becomes crystal clear: isolate and conquer. With Venezuela out of the picture, Cuba's lost its sugar daddy. With Russia bogged down in Ukraine and China dealing with its own economic mess, neither one is in a great spot to bail Cuba out. The island is seen as totally vulnerable, a low-hanging fruit that can be picked off to send a huge message to Beijing and Moscow: stay out of our hemisphere. All this geopolitical chess-playing, it has a devastating real-world impact. So let's take a look at what this maximum pressure campaign actually feels like for the 11 million people who are just trying to live their lives in Cuba.
Well, for starters, life is just grinding to a halt. Without that Venezuelan oil, the power plants have gone quiet. The result? An average of 12 to 14 hours of blackouts every single day. Havana, once this vibrant Paris of the Caribbean, becomes a ghost town after dark. Food is rotting in refrigerators, hospitals are struggling to keep the lights on in the ICU. It's a nightmare.
And when you're faced with that kind of reality, people are voting with their feet. Since 2020, an estimated 1.5 million Cubans have fled the island. This isn't just a trickle, it's a historic flood that is draining the country of its people. To really put that into perspective, that's about 15% of the entire population, just gone in only a few years. And the people who are leaving are the young, the educated, the able-bodied. Some analysts are calling it a demographic suicide, leaving behind a nation of kids and the elderly with nobody left to rebuild. And this crisis, it's triggered a huge psychological shift. I mean, for decades, the revolution's big slogan was Patria o Muerte, homeland or death. But a new generation has totally flipped it. Their cry, which became the anthem for the recent protests, is Patria y Vida, homeland and life. They don't want to die for a cause anymore. They just want to live. So, with the people literally starving and Washington tightening the noose, the collapse seems inevitable, doesn't it? Well, not so fast. It is way more complicated than that. And to understand why, you need to know who really holds the power on the island.
The president might be the public face of Cuba, but the real power behind the throne is this entity called Gaeza. It's a massive business empire, and it's controlled completely by the military. They own the hotels, the supermarkets, the import-export companies, pretty much everything that makes money. For the generals running Gaeza, a change in government isn't just a political loss. It's the loss of their multi-billion-dollar fortune. And that really explains why this fortress is still standing. I mean, first, the U.S. has been predicting Cuba's collapse for 65 years, so there's that. Second, decades of repression mean there's no organized opposition leader for people to rally behind. Third, there's a real sense of nationalist pride and a deep suspicion of American meddling. But the most important reason? The military elite have absolutely everything to lose, and you can bet they will fight to the death to protect their empire. Which brings us to the final nail-biting question. The whole U.S. strategy is to push the country so far to the breaking point that the pain becomes unbearable, even for the soldiers. So as the hunger gets worse and the lights stay off, will the rank-and-file soldiers, whose families are suffering just as much as everyone else, keep defending the regime? Or will they finally turn their guns around? That is the billion-dollar question hanging over Havana right now.
Follow at TeaOrSugar for more history.